Salma is a student who gets transported to a magical world by a king who wants to sacrifice him in order to ensure his kingdom survives. Salma puts his brain to use and is not only able to save his own life, but also becomes the new king who gets to marry the princess and start his own harem while trying to stop a massive all-out war which is about to happen. Salma is a total nerd who lived with his grandfather in modern-day Japan and is a very realistic person when it comes to planning. This studious guy was always studying in the library as he wanted to be a civil servant one day. When he was in a library, he went over to get a book off the shelf when suddenly, a bright light appeared on top of him. He seemed to be visibly confused at this occurrence, but before he could do anything, he was sucked inside of it. The very next moment, he was falling from the sky in a totally unknown land. He was super scared, thinking that he would die falling from this height, but surprisingly, he landed softly on the ground without any injuries. He shook the dizziness off and noticed that he was surrounded by a bunch of cloaked figures looking intently at him. This scared him a bit, but he put on a brave face and decided to bluff that he was totally in control of the situation. The cloaked figures escorted him to what looked like a courtroom. He looked around and spotted people wearing various dated uniforms. Some of them weren't even men, looking instead like a mix between animals and humans. The king, who had been sitting on the throne until now, got up and welcomed him to his kingdom, calling Salma the hero, which confused him. The king thanked him for answering his call, but this made Salma mad as he never answered any calls and he was, more or less, yanked from his place without his permission and brought here. The king was taken aback and asked him not to be angry at them as they had an explanation. He explained that he was currently in a world that has witches and wizards, dwarves and elves, knights and dragons that roam the world freely. Some time ago, however, a small void opened in the northern part of their continent, and suddenly a huge horde of demons started coming out of it. All of the surrounding kingdoms started combining their strength to fight against the demons, but it turned out that the demons seemed to be innumerable. No matter how many of them were killed, they always seemed to be replaced immediately. Sadly, their kingdom doesn't have inexhaustible manpower, and hence they cannot keep fighting such a losing battle. Salma looked at the king and told him that there was no way he was going to fight against the demons. The king seemed embarrassed, so one of his ministers came forward and explained to him that one of the kingdoms, known as the Chaos Empire, is the strongest of them all and has been constantly asking them for monetary support. If they don't offer monetary support, the empire has threatened them with war. Salma asked the minister how he was tied up with all of this, and the minister looked down sheepishly, telling him that they had decided to summon a hero and then offer him to that empire, as it was the only way they would avoid paying money since they didn't have any. Salma was shocked beyond measure and blankly looked at the king, who looked embarrassed. He asked the king whether this was really the plan, to call a goddamn hero to his kingdom just to hand him over, and the king solemnly nodded. Salma started thinking about what he could do to escape this situation, and realized that there was no way he could run away from here, as he would probably be caught very easily, and it might become troublesome for him. He decided that he would deal with this situation logically and realistically. He looked at the king and asked him whether he knew what would happen to him once he turned him over to the Chaos Empire. The king shook his head and said that he had no idea what would happen, which was definitely not what Salma wanted to hear. He asked him whether he at least knew if he would be safe when turned over to them, or if they would immediately kill him for some reason or other. They didn't answer that question, which made him realize that he could not leave it to luck, and decided to take matters into his own hands. He asked the king about the last time a hero was summoned in this kingdom, and the minister replied that the last time was 500 years ago. Since then, people had been trying but couldn't summon anyone. Salma immediately pressed the matter and asked them what would happen after they turned him over. Would they stop demanding things from them afterwards? This shut everyone up as they realized that they cannot keep summoning heroes to hand them over. The king looked confused, and Salma decided that this was the moment he had to use to get out of this problem. He looked at them and told the king that he would help them get out of this situation as he was the chosen one, the hero who would lead their kingdom to revolution. Everyone was shocked at this, but Salma told the king that he was going to check all of the financial records and set everything straight so that their kingdom could start generating more money and not collapse under its own weight. Everyone rejoiced at this amazing speech, and the king decided to give it a shot. They all went inside the room, and Salma realized that he didn't really have any plans as of now, but decided to simply take an account of all the finances from the king and the minister. So, for 3 days and 3 nights continuously, they discussed all the finances for the kingdom, and he finally was able to come up with some sort of solution. The next day, they all gathered in front of a massive audience where Salma was very sleep-deprived and looked like he could sleep at any moment. The king stood beside him and declared that he, the king, had decided that Salma was more fit to rule the kingdom, and starting now, he was transferring the kingship to Salma. Everyone was shocked at this revelation, but none more than Salma, who had no idea this was coming. On top of that, the king proudly declared that to make his claim to the throne even stronger, he had decided to marry his only daughter, Lycia, to Salma. Just like that, within moments, Salma's entire life was changed, and he was given the task of changing the lives of all the subjects residing in his kingdom. He sat down in his chambers and started working on a room full of paperwork without any breaks or sleep because of the sheer volume of work. Suddenly, he heard the door open, and a beautiful young woman dressed in a military outfit barged in without saying anything. Salma was so tired that he didn't even look up from his work and asked her whether she was a learned person and knew how to read and write. This took Lycia by surprise, who heatedly answered that she was a very learned person. Salma then asked her some basic maths questions without looking up, and when she was able to answer them, he asked her to help him deal with his paperwork. Lycia walked up to him and announced that he was talking to the daughter of the former king. This made Salma look up from his paperwork, and he asked her why she was wearing a military outfit. She explained that she always had a knack for combat and wanted to help on the front lines, so she enrolled herself in the military. She asked him what he did with her father, as there was no way her father would give up kingship. Salma let out a deep sigh and told her that he was summoned to this weird place and only wanted to escape being sent to the Chaos Kingdom, but her father got impressed by him and made him the king. He reassured her, however, that it wouldn't be for long as he didn't want to be king and just wanted to go back to his own place. He told her that he would stay in this kingdom for 2 or 3 years until the kingdom regained its footing and got more stable financially. He also told her not to worry about the engagement, as she could cancel it any time she wanted to. Lycia seemed impressed after hearing about his humility and decided to talk to him more cordially. He explained to her that he was already working on getting more money and had sold all the useless jewels and treasures from the kingdom's vault, as their country needed food that people could eat and not jewels that were locked in some vault. Lycia seemed petrified and told him that a lot of those treasures were ancient artifacts that were basically extremely precious. Salma calmed her down by showing her a list of items that he had sorted and how he hadn't sold any national heritage items or any dark magic items. He had only sold basic jewelry in gold and silver. Lycia seemed to be more relaxed now and asked him about his next plans. Salma replied that he wasn't going to send money to the Chaos Kingdom as of now, as the people living in this kingdom were still hungry and needed something to eat. Lycia suggested that instead of sending the money straight to the Chaos Empire, he could use it to strengthen their own military. Salma thought for a moment and realized that she was right. If they gave the money to the Chaos Empire, they would just keep asking for more, but if they invested it in their own military, they might be able to stand up to them and retake their position slowly but surely. Salma started understanding how this world worked. He took an extensive tour of the kingdom and got to know that it had a lot of hidden properties that he wasn't aware of. From the looks of it, the kingdom looked like a very old-school area with no modern techniques or tools being used, but if you took a closer look, you would realize that this kingdom had a lot of the modern luxuries hidden in a different form. For example, the light bulb is a pretty modern invention that has solved the problem of illumination forever, but in this world there is no electricity, much less a light bulb. Surprisingly, every street has a bunch of street lamps, and even at night, the houses are illuminated. This is because of the special magic that the people of this continent possess. They can create light, heat, and water at will, which comes in very handy when you think about it. He was also taken by one of the priests who told him to put his hand over a stupid-looking statue, claiming that if he had any affinity for magic, he would know immediately. He put his hand over the statue, and suddenly he lost himself in reality and started seeing a bunch of bright light spots against a black background. He remembered that he hadn't taken any LSD, so he quickly realized that it must be the work of magic. When he came to, the priest told him that he did have magical affinity and that he should go and practice some magic as it would make him better at it. He went back to his chambers, where he had hired a bunch of working personnel who were able to read and write to do some paperwork. He himself sat down on the chair and started working, but before that, he was able to play around with his magic. He transferred his consciousness into 3 pens which immediately started doing paperwork on their own. He tried with a 4th pen, but it didn't work, making him realize that for now, 3 objects were his limit. While doing the paperwork, Lycia entered the chamber to check up on him and was surprised to see the magical pens. She asked him about it as she had never really seen this kind of magic, but Salma told her that he had created it just now. Lycia had no trouble believing this, but before she could ask anything else, he asked her to get down to work and put a ton of paperwork on her as well. They all kept working for countless hours before Salma looked up through his baggy eyes to see that all of them had fallen asleep out of exhaustion. He walked over to Lycia, who was also sleeping on the couch very cutely, and observed her for a moment before pushing some hair out of her face lovingly. Lycia, however, was used to creeps like him and immediately woke up asking him what he was doing. Salma told her that he just came to see whether she was sleeping or not and nothing else. The next morning, he told her that he wanted to show her something and they both got on a horse. Lycia was surprised. Usually, a man is supposed to take the reins, but Salma was sitting on the back of the horse holding her waist as tightly as possible as he didn't know how to ride a horse. They both went on a surprisingly romantic ride, which ended near a giant field covered in white. They got off and Salma walked alongside Lycia and showed her the fields, informing her that their entire country was filled with cotton fields like these, which were borderline useless. He explained that once cotton used to be a very valuable commodity, so all the farmers decided to grow it on a huge scale so they could export it and earn a lot of money. This resulted in the entire kingdom starting to produce cotton instead of other agricultural crops. That would have been fine as, with the money earned, they could easily import food, but the problem arose when other countries also started growing cotton, leading to an increase in supply while the demand wasn't that high. This led to a cotton crash where prices were down to earth and they were worth nothing. This is the reason why their country is suffering through such a bad famine and they have nothing to eat at all. Lycia looked sad as she was supposed to be one of the leaders of this country, and yet she had no idea about this entire fiasco. She apologized to him, but he told her that she shouldn't apologize to anybody, but help him bring the country back to its former glory. They went back to the dining hall and started having breakfast together when a man called Ludwin introduced himself as the leader of the guards. He sat down with them and asked Salma if there was anything he could do. Salma very frankly replied that not many people in this country were useful, as most of them had no idea what they were doing. He told him that he was in serious need of more trained manpower and people with specialized skills. Ludwin bowed down and told him that he would see what he could do before taking his leave. Licia and Salma later had tea where Salma suddenly got an idea and asked Licia whether they had any kind of broadcasting device. Licia had no idea what this man was talking about, so he tried to explain what kind of device he meant, and Licia suddenly exclaimed that they had a device like that for public announcements. This would be perfect for Salma's plan, so he told her to take him to the device as soon as possible. He explained to her that he was going to recruit a workforce from the general public. Licia told him that they already do it, which surprised Salma, and he asked her how they select people. She replied that they have a series of written examinations, and people who pass all of those are taken into the castle as workers. Salma told her that the strategy was highly inefficient, as they were probably missing out on extremely talented individuals. He asked her how high the literacy rate in their kingdom was, to which she replied that it was around 30%. He looked at her and told her that written exams alone cannot tell you how talented an individual is. It is the aptitude of the individual that is important, not how literate they are. He told her that this set of exams must be enforced by high-ranking nobles who have the influence and the money to send their children to the best masters to get them educated and put them in positions of power in the court. It was classic nepotism. She was shocked at this revelation and asked him what he proposed to do. He told her that she would know soon. The next day, he stationed himself in front of the broadcasting device alongside Licia and started broadcasting to the entire kingdom. He addressed his subjects and told them that he was going to give them a very good opportunity to completely turn their lives around. Grabbing everyone's attention, he told them that he was proposing an open round for people with very high aptitude, specialization, or any kind of skill that might be helpful. He told them that nothing else mattered. They could be literate or illiterate, wealthy or dirt poor. All that mattered were their skills, strengths, and aptitude. The next day came around, and everyone gathered inside the court to witness the new people who would be chosen directly by the king. Salma sat on his throne with Licia by his side, and the selection began. He noticed that only 5 people had nominated themselves for the selection exam. All of them bowed in front of him as soon as Ludwin introduced the king, apart from a tall, dark-skinned girl called Aisha. She claimed that she was from the clan of Dark Elves, and they don't bow in front of anyone to whom they haven't pledged their lives. Ludwin got mad and told her to bow down immediately, but Salma stopped him and told him to let it go. He quickly used his special magic to remotely read everything about these elves and realized that they are very well known and feared for their combat prowess and are supposed to be excellent warriors. She told him that she was one of the best warriors in her clan, making her one of the best warriors in the entire kingdom. She then asked Salma whether he could help her. He was taken aback and didn't know what to say, but the elf continued, telling him that for some reason the god-protected forest where they live has been deteriorating at a very rapid rate for no reason. According to her, she and her clansmen take very good care of the forest, but even then it seems to be dying on them and they have no idea why it is happening. She also added that she had heard that Salma is a very intellectual person and might be able to devise a strategy to save the forest. Salma looked confused, but he quickly started thinking and asked whether they were thinning the forest or not. Aisha looked at him blankly and asked what he meant by that. Salma realized that these techniques must be comparatively modern and explained to her that when a forest is left to grow on its own, oftentimes the older trees end up covering all of the canopy. This results in no sunlight penetrating to the forest floor, because of which no seedlings or saplings are able to grow. The entire forest floor dies, and there are no young plants to replace any older trees that might fall. This also leaves the area as a whole susceptible to erosion and other massive natural problems. Suddenly, Aisha completely bowed down in front of him and told him that she was pledging her entire life to Salma and was ready to fight for him and die for him. She told him to please accept her as his bodyguard and to help them restore the forest. Salma graciously accepted her, and the next girl that came up for trial turned out to be a beautiful young woman called Juna. She's supposed to be one of the most beautiful people that exist in the kingdom and the best singer that ever existed. According to the minister, Juna has descended from a long line of Lorelei, who used to be extremely beautiful and used to wreck ships by swaying the sailors in the wrong directions when they followed their beautiful voices. Salma realized that if this is true, then singing should be in her blood. He called her forth and asked her to sing a song for everyone as it was being broadcast around the kingdom. She looked up at him and told him that she had no problem doing that, but most of her songs are sad and melancholic. Salma asked her whether she could learn a song by heart after just listening to it once, and she said yes. Salma quickly flicked out his phone and gave her an earphone to hear one of the songs that he had on it. She seemed to like the song and it passed the vibe check. She returned the earphones to Salma, and everyone seemed surprised by the new device that Salma just whipped out of his pockets. She got ready and started singing the song very beautifully, and after the performance was over, everyone applauded her excellent singing. Salma told her that he was really impressed by her ability to remember a song by heart after hearing it once and singing it perfectly. The next person to come forward was a stout man named Pancho. He seemed to be very nervous and was sweating profusely. He got up and tried to address the king, but fell after tripping over his own leg like an idiot. He then got up and explained that his special ability is that he is a glutton and has tried almost every dish that this country has to offer. He expected Salma to laugh in his face, but surprisingly enough, Salma rushed down to shake his hand and told him that he was waiting for someone like him to come along and that he was really happy to hire him. He told Pancho that at a time when the entire kingdom is suffering through famine, abilities like his are of great importance. This really boosted Pancho's confidence, and he started crying, saying that all his life he had been called a fatso. Salma, however, thought differently and told him that he is the one who will be responsible for bringing their country out of famine and back to prosperity. The next candidate turned out to be a sharp-looking man who walked up to Salma and introduced himself as Hakuya. He told Salma that all the while Salma was judging the others, he had been judging him. He is supposed to be one of the best minds in all of the kingdom, and is a fanatic about reading every kind of literature he can get his hands on. He is a very knowledgeable person, which Salma immediately realized from the way he talked. He asked Hakuya what his decision was, and whether he thought Salma was worthy of being king or not. Hakuya replied coolly that all of it came down to one decision that Salma made. It all depended on whether Salma thought Pancho was useless or not. If he thought Pancho was useless, he would have failed to be a worthy king, as he wouldn't know what his kingdom needs the most right now. But surprisingly, Salma was extremely enthusiastic after the appearance of Pancho. This made Hakuya believe that Salma actually had some brains and wasn't just another nobody. In fact, Hakuya was so impressed that he asked Salma to let him be his right-hand man and advisor. Salma was impressed by Hakuya's decision-making abilities and decided to hire him as his prime minister. The last person to come forth is a young girl called Tamo. She was a wolf girl who is supposed to be able to talk to all the animals of every race. She seemed to be very nervous and was hardly speaking for herself. Licia commented that members of the wolf clan are never seen inside their kingdom, to which Salma replied that she could be a refugee. He asked her to speak up, but she didn't, and she got even more scared. Salma decided to descend from his throne and walked up to her, crouching down in front of her and asking her what was wrong. She whispered in his ear that something bad was happening and said something that made Salma's eyes go wide with shock. Salma quickly regained himself and acted like nothing had happened. He gets up and starts walking back to his throne, telling them that they are all dismissed for now, but that he would like to see the young girl in his chambers. Tamo, Licia, Ludwin, Salma, and the minister all gather in Salma's chamber while Tamo sits on a couch. Salma asks the rest if they heard what Tamo told him in his ear, but all of them shake their heads, claiming that it was barely a whisper and no one could hear what she actually said. Salma lets out a sigh of relief, knowing that no one else in the kingdom heard it as it was being broadcast all over. He tells the rest that what he is going to tell them must be kept a secret from anyone at all costs, as it might shake the entire kingdom. He finally discloses that Tamo told him she can not only speak to animals, but she is also able to speak to demons. Licia is totally shocked and tells Salma that it must be some kind of mistake, as demons speak a language that is very different from any of the languages that any of the other races speak, and there is no person alive who is able to decipher their language apart from their own kind. Salma looks at her and tells her that is the reason why Tamo is probably one of the most important people in the entire country, more so than him. Licia asks Tamo when she learned that she could talk to the demon race, and she replies that some time ago, when she was in the forest, she was just roaming around having fun when she suddenly heard some weird noises and went to investigate. To her horror, she spotted a person from the demon race who was short in height and had the head of a dog looking at her. She started screaming for help when the demon told her to shut up in his own language, which she understood, and she stopped screaming, scared of him. The demon got surprised by this and asked her whether she could understand what he was saying, and she replied yes. Suddenly, they heard a bunch of noises coming, and the demon told her to run away, as if the rest saw her, they would kill her. That was the last time she saw him, as she ran away from the situation. Licia looks at Salma and asks him whether he is planning on some sort of compromise between humans and the demons, as that is borderline impossible since they have killed countless humans. But in retort, Salma tells her that humans have killed countless demons. He suggests that there is a possibility that this entire war is just a big misunderstanding caused by the fact that none of the parties can understand each other at all. Licia thinks for a bit and realizes that he might be right. He tells Ludwin that Tamo must be given royal-level security immediately and that he must make sure that she is kept safe. The minister, however, tells them that this will only bring more attention to her, as it would be very weird for a poor girl like Tamo to have royal guards protecting her at every turn. Salma thinks about it, realizes that he is right, and starts thinking about what could be done. The minister suggests that he could adopt Tamo as his daughter, and that should solve the problem, but then realizes that he has to marry someone before he can adopt her. So Salma suggests Licia's father adopt Tamo, which will make it normal for her to have royal protection at all times. Tamo, however, looks at them and interrupts, telling them that she already has a family who is living in the refugee camp, and she is not leaving them. Salma smiles at her and tells her that obviously, when she's adopted, Tamo's parents will become relatives to the king and will start living here at the castle alongside her. She lets out a yelp of joy and thanks them for everything that they have been doing for her. Later, while Salma was chilling around in Licia's room, it was brought to his attention that Pancho was back from his quest, and he immediately went to meet him alongside Licia. They all sit down, and Pancho thanks Salma for letting him use his royal wyvern, which made it very easy and fast to collect everything he wanted. The next dish that Pancho brings forth horrifies every single one of them. It turns out to be a slime monster. They all seem disgusted, but Pancho wears an apron and starts rolling out the slime flat on the countertop and cutting them into small, noodle-like slices before he boils them in water alongside salt and adds a couple of vegetables and some stock. The finished product seems unappetizing to the rest of them, but Salma comments that the dish looks like ramen from his world and sits down to eat. He takes a bite out of it and is pleasantly surprised to find that it even tastes like ramen and starts slurping noisily. Slowly, the rest of them also tried it and started enjoying it. Finally, their broadcast ends with that, and it turns out to be wildly successful, as soon every single eatery in the area started serving all of the meals that they showcased, and soon they also started mixing things together to create new and exciting meals. He's called to the throne room by one of the guards who tells him that the prime minister is insisting on an audience with the king. So Salma goes inside the courtroom and finds Hakuya and the prime minister both bowing down in front of him. He tells them to get up and speak their minds. The prime minister tells him that he feels that he should follow the former king's example and step down from his post to give the new blood a chance to shine and make the situation better by dealing with them with new techniques instead of following the old school method, as it doesn't seem to be working. Salma seems to be very surprised at this sudden resignation and asks him about his successor, as they need a prime minister who is as smart as him and as wise. The minister, however, tells Salma not to worry as he could take in Hakuya as his apprentice and believes that he is ready to take the post of prime minister and can do excellent work in the future. Salma looks at Hakuya, who is standing there, and realizes that he might very well be the perfect candidate for the job. He accepts the minister's resignation and appoints Hakuya as the new prime minister. Hakuya looks up at Salma and thanks him before telling him to take the entire day off as he has been working nonstop, and if he keeps working like this, he will get burnt out, leading to a decline in productivity in those around him. At first, Salma seems reluctant to take the day off as he believes there's a lot of work to be done, but Hakuya tells him that he needs to take the day off no matter what and he can do the rest of the work the next day. Salma decides to follow his advice and arranges a date with Licia, with Aisha escorting them. Licia at first seems shocked at the fact that Salma is taking time off and asks him whether he's okay. Salma tells her that everything is fine and that he just wants to relax for an evening. Licia tells him that they shouldn't go out as the king and queen. She whips out a bunch of military school uniforms and hands them over to him while wearing one herself. They get Aisha as protection and then go inside the city. After roaming for a while, they decide to pay Juno a visit in her cafe and sit down in a booth to have some relaxing snacks. While relaxing on their seats and talking about the kingdom, they overhear a pretty loud conversation coming from the adjoining table, which is occupied by a fox girl and a red-haired guy. They seem to be having a heated argument, and they are so loud that Salma can't help but overhear their entire conversation. The fox girl is Keed, and the guy is called Hal. They start talking again, and Hal tells Keed that he doesn't trust the new king at all as he himself seems to be a very young and inexperienced person, so why should he follow someone who is around his age and probably has less experience on the battlefield? Keed, however, tells him to shut up and tells him that the new king seems to be a formidable person in terms of intelligence and strategy and is doing really good work. Hal, however, seems to have young blood and only wants war so he can prove himself in a battle and earn the respect of his peers. He tells her that he plans to go over to the Duke of Carmine and join his army. Keed seems horrified and tells him to never say that again, as the Duke of Carmine is in open rebellion against the new king for no reason. Hal, however, shouts at her that he will do as he pleases, and he doesn't believe the new king is fit to be anything. At that point, Salma walks over to their table and asks Hal straight up why he doesn't like the new king. Hal looks up at him and asks him who the hell he is, but Keed seems to recognize Salma as soon as she sees him and gets very flustered. They all sit down at a different table and start talking again. Hal again tries to get in Salma's face, asking him who he thinks he is, but Aisha immediately grabs his hand, twisting it before grabbing his face in her palms and crushing it. Salma tells her to let him go as that should be enough, while Keed looks at him, scared that Hal will get hurt. Salma then decides to quit playing and looks at Hal, before asking him whether he still doesn't recognize him. Hal immediately realizes that Salma is the king himself, and quickly the tone of his voice changes. Salma asks him why he wants to go over to the Duke of Carmine, but Hal doesn't say anything out of fear. Salma looks at him and tells him that he will not tell Hal to stay with him, and he can and should do as he pleases. If he wants to go over to the Duke of Carmine, he should definitely do so because you can't force anyone to follow you as they must do so themselves. Salma, however, plays a mental game with him as he understands the underlying feelings of both Hal and Keed. He tells him that he needs to understand that once he is on the opposite side, he will have to fight against Keed, and if he decides to avoid coming into a head-to-head battle with her, someone else will. And if she gets injured, he will not be allowed by his army to protect her. Even if she is dying and could be saved, he will not be allowed by his army to do so, and they will consider it treason. Hal goes into silent thinking mode and thinks long and hard about it before deciding that he doesn't want to go on the opposite side and fight against Salma or Keed. Salma is glad to know that and thanks him before taking his leave. The next day, he sits down with Licia for tea and explains to her that he's getting good with his dark magic and can now control 4 inanimate objects alone. Before she could say anything, however, he was called to the courtroom because the head of the prestigious Magna House had come to meet him and request his attendance. Salma immediately goes over to meet with them and finds Hal, who seems to have gotten many injuries on his face. Glaive and Keed all present there, bowing their heads. He sits down on the throne and Glaive immediately starts apologizing to Salma, telling him that he had no idea that Hal said all the things that he said and was only informed by Keed later. He tells Salma that he has disciplined his son and requests that he not take very strict actions against him. He promises that Salma has the unwavering support of the Magna family and they will always stand beside him in all circumstances. Salma thanks him for his loyalty and tells him that he doesn't intend to punish Hal and it seems like Glaive has punished him enough. He tells Glaive that he's going to take Keed in as one of the mages in his royal guard, and also make Hal an officer in his royal army, so they can stay close and support each other. Several days later, finally, the bulk of the paperwork has been completed, and the remaining paperwork can be done by using Sauma's dark magic, so he shouldn't need any more manpower now. He calls in a meeting with everyone who has been working with paperwork for the entire duration, and once they assemble, he gives them a magnanimous speech about how they are the real treasure of the kingdom. Just because of them, he can start working on the next project, which can ensure the long-term survival of the entire kingdom, and can even result in the food shortage problem being solved. He tells them to take an entire week off for their amazing work. He tells them that he would have paid them extra money for everything that they did, but the kingdom is short on money right now, so instead, he tells them to go into the royal wine cellar, which holds the most amazing and deeply flavored vintage wine. He tells them that they can take an entire bottle each for themselves and do whatever they want with it. They can sell it or drink it, it's up to them. The entire group of men rejoices at this, thanks Sauma for his generosity, and rushes off to the wine cellar. Licia asks him whether it was advisable for him to give them a week off from work, as they still have a bunch of things to take care of. Sauma tells her to chill out for a bit as the work is going at a great pace. He tells her that he plans to create a port on the shore of one of the villages, which will be a very strategic destination for trade in the kingdom, and create a trading town in the place where the village was, giving employment to a bunch of people. He tells her that ships from any other country will have to pay taxes and tolls in order to trade in their kingdom, and this will reduce the amount of illegal trade done beneath their noses. Apart from that, he will put low taxes on any ship that has arrived at the port to trade food crops at low prices, which will reduce the problem of food shortages in the country. He explains to her that everything depends on supply and demand, and right now the demand for food crops is at its highest, whereas the supply is down to zero. The next day, Sauma, Licia, and Aisha go to the small village where the construction has to be done. Ludwin is already there and has set up tents for everyone. He welcomes Sauma, and when asked whether there have been any issues with the construction, Ludwin replies that many of the village elders are strongly advising against building a port on the shore of their village at any cost. When he asks for the reason for this disagreement, Ludwin implies that the elders believe in a very old legend that says that if anything is built in that area, the water gods will destroy the entire region by sending a giant monster made of water that swallows everything. Sauma seems interested and asks Ludwin to take him to the elders who said that. Ludwin takes him to one of the houses where Sauma meets up with one of the elders, and they sit down to talk. The elder again advises Sauma that if he builds his port over there, the water gods will definitely take their revenge and destroy the entire region. Sauma asks him when the water gods destroyed anything and how they knew it was coming. The elder replies that it happened when his grandfather used to live here. According to the legend, just before the sea monster arrives, the ground starts shaking from its footsteps, and after a while the monster arrives from the sea and gulps down anything in its way, destroying everything that they hold dear. Sauma thinks about it, decides to call it a day, and heads back to his castle. He calls Hakuya and Ludwin into his chambers where they discuss this predicament. Hakuya looks at Sauma and asks him whether he believes in the myth, but Sauma replies that obviously he doesn't believe in a sea monster, but what he believes in is that myths are always grounded in some truth. He tells them that he has decided to change the place for construction, and that he will be marking out the entire area, which the villagers believe is cursed. Hakuya cannot believe his ears and asks him whether he's afraid of some mythical sea god. Sauma replies that he is obviously not worried about a sea god, but he believes that what people are calling a sea monster is a tsunami, and when they say they feel the earth rattle from its footsteps, they are misunderstanding it, as it must be an earthquake. He believes that the area must be very susceptible to a tsunami after an earthquake and decides to think ahead and not create a port that is very disaster-prone. Sauma's construction plans kick off, and Hal is exhausted from all the manual labor, so he begins to complain bitterly, asking Keed why the Forbidden Army has anything to do with road construction. Keed tells him to shut it and return to work with a clear warning that he should dare not call her by her name because she's technically his boss. She then explains that the reason why the army is doing most of the construction work is that there are so many roads to construct and there's a lack of manpower, so the only way to make significant progress would be to include them in the project. At lunch, Hal tastes a delicious burger that was made by Sauma, and Keed tells him that the fresh vegetables in the burger came from a nearby village, all thanks to a newly constructed road. She further explains that the roads are contributing to a decrease in food prices because there's now increased supply, and Hal is surprised by their king's commendable foresight. Just then, Sauma walks in with Licia, surprising both of them, and Hal immediately stands up to salute the king, but he orders him to stop acting so formal and to call him by his name because he's happy to have found a guy his age to talk freely with. As they walk on the new roads, Sauma explains the process of road construction to Licia, who has never seen how they are built. He tells her the raw materials used in making roads and shows her the street lamps, which are powered by some luminescent moss plants for nighttime illumination, and the warden trees, which were planted to temporarily protect the village against the influx of wild animals. Suddenly, a messenger bird interrupts their discussion and delivers a letter to Aisha. In the letter, her father informs her about a deadly landslide which swallowed half of their village, causing many to be unaccounted for. Aisha is visibly disturbed and calls out to Sauma, but he approaches the situation by reasoning calmly. Immediately, he instructs Keed to mobilize a group inclusive of herself to serve as the first rescue team that will go with him to the Dark Elves' village. He briefly comforts Aisha but tells her that instead of crying at a time like this, she should brace herself to accompany them to her village, since they were all foreigners and needed directions. Finally, he tells Lycia to hurry to the palace, mobilize another rescue team, and tell Hakuya to send relief packages to the Dark Elves. Salma asks Aisha how long it will take to reach her village, and she says it will take them 2 days using a normal military march. Now he is deeply worried about the time of their arrival, explaining that if they allow a 3-day period to elapse between the occurrence of the disaster and the arrival of the rescue team, the death toll will be greatly increased. Like an answered prayer, one of their strange riders runs by, and Salma gets the idea to use them in transporting his rescue team to Aisha's village while he goes with the royal carriage. They finally arrive at the village in the evening, and Aisha's father begins to hail the king and then introduces himself as the elder. But Salma tells him to skip the formalities for a better time and asks for an explanation of the current situation. The elder tells Salma that 100 lives were claimed by the incident and 40 people are yet to be accounted for. Salma tells him to compile a list of the missing people, and each person's name will be struck off the list once they are found. He also tells the elder to have someone watch the mountain for movements in case another landslide occurs while they're on the rescue mission. To accomplish this, Aisha offers to play watchman, and her father is comfortable with her presence there because she knows the forest like the back of her palm. After the discussion, Salma addresses his search and rescue team, encouraging them to put their road construction skills to good use as they will need to excavate the land in order to thoroughly search for the missing people. When they start digging, Salma suddenly stops and runs towards a fallen tree trunk, saying he can hear the voices of people, but Hal is confused because he can't hear anything. However, when Hal later digs in the area, he is shocked to see a human hand, so he drags the trunk away and the person is pulled from the ground. Hal is surprised that Salma could tell that someone was buried there, so Salma shows him the wooden mouse that was carved for him to find missing people in places that were too tight for his rescue team to squeeze into. Salma controlled these mice using his magic by sharing a part of his consciousness with them, just as he did with the pens and the dummy. Eventually, the search is concluded and all the villagers have been accounted for, so the elder thanks Salma for his timely intervention, even though, unfortunately, a number of lives were lost. Suddenly, one of the elder's daughters comes in to say that the princess just arrived with the second rescue team, but a man crying in the corner says it is too late. Salma explains that even though it is late, there were other activities being performed by the rescue team, such as tending to the wounded and reconstructing damaged buildings. Yet this man tells him that all their efforts will still not bring back the dead, but the elder immediately interrupts him and tells him to be quiet before explaining to Salma that the young man was his younger brother Rob, who had lost his wife to the disaster, and that his only daughter was currently in a critical condition. Rob cries bitterly because he protected the forest with so much dedication, so he couldn't understand why it had killed his wife. The elder comforts him and tells him to mourn his loss without putting the blame on anyone. Later, Aisha tells Salma that Rob was one of those who had opposed the thinning of trees that he earlier proposed and wonders if that might have contributed to the landslide. Salma explains that the disaster was merely a case of bad luck in addition to the high frequency of rainfall. As they head back to the palace, Lycia apologizes for being unable to do anything helpful, but Salma says that he feels more useless because he should have planned for disasters like this ahead of time. He also tells her that he regrets being completely focused on fixing the food shortage problem, that he has paid no attention to other important matters. Days later, Juna checks in on Salma and finds him surrounded by a lot of papers on his bed, so she tells him that Lycia had complained and is worried about his unhealthy sleep habits. Salma says that it is because his mind has been preoccupied with a lot of things, so she walks to his bed, sits beside him, and asks him to lie down. As he does, she places a palm over his forehead and caresses it lovingly, telling him that it is understandable if he doesn't want to look weak to the princess, but he can call her whenever he feels worn out. To her surprise, Salma is already fast asleep, so Juna smiles and sings sweetly to him while he sleeps. Meanwhile, an argument ensues between the leaders of the dukedoms. A lion-headed man called Duke Jorg Carmine insists on overthrowing Salma as king because he is unfit to rule their kingdom. Duchess Excel Walter is confused by this, commenting on how much Salma has done for their land, but Carmine says that Salma has been neglecting important matters and firing all their loyal service chiefs in the name of combating corruption. The Duke has no intention of ruling himself and only wants the former king reinstated because of his loyal commitment. The other Duke is named Castor Vargas. He's also willing to rebel against Salma and is clamoring for war before Salma gains the affection of everyone. Excel warns them both that other kingdoms like Amadonia would want to use their rebellion against Salma to attack the kingdom, but Castor says that Amadonia was willing to send reinforcements against Salma. The Duchess is not convinced by their offer because she believes that they sent a similar offer to Salma as well because they want to cause confusion in order to attack Elfredin when their soldiers are all in battle. Suddenly, Castor's daughter named Carla bursts into the room and declares that if her father was fighting Salma, she would fight by his side, no matter the consequences. Gaius, the mischievous ruler of Amadonia, is glad to hear that Carmine has accepted his invitation to go against Salma, calling him a foolish old man because he is going to cause confusion by sending Carmine reinforcements to fight Salma and sending Salma reinforcements to fight against Carmine, just as Lady Excel had suspected. His son Prince Julius backs him up, but his daughter Princess Roroa is totally non-supportive of their plan and only envies the land of Elfredin, which keeps flourishing by the hour. At the palace, Salma consults Hakuya about a proposed plan to use violence in order to protect their kingdom. Salma is originally against the employment of cruel measures, but his grandfather's final words ring in his ears, so he chooses to protect those whom he now considers his family. With a decisive tone, Salma orders that they kick off their plan to subjugate the rebels. On the other hand, Gaius orders his army to invade the Elfredin territory, specifically the grain city of Altamura, while he assumes that Salma is fighting against the dukes. Gaius says that it is high time they regain the land that was stolen from their ancestors 50 years ago, but before he finishes his wonderful speech, a minister Colbert comes running and interrupts him. Colbert bows and tells him not to begin a war because he would plunge his people into starvation, but Gaius walks over and kicks the poor guy in his face. Still, the minister reminds him that they are under the Mankind Declaration because they signed a treaty. Gaius and his son are too stubborn to listen to Colbert, so they dismiss him. Colbert comes out looking like he just came out of a boxing ring, and he meets Gaius's daughter on his way, who tells him that she plans to escape the kingdom, and that he should get ready just in case things go haywire. Before he knows it, he says goodbye to gravity. Meanwhile, Salma sends for Lycia to ask her for a special favor. He does what we call a video chat with the three dukes. After the introductions, he tells them that if they continue to rebel against him, he would be forced to recognize them as traitors. Excel asks him what his intentions are concerning the duchies, and he says that he only wants to unite their respective armies under his command, with no intention of harming them individually. But Castor is against this idea, because he fears that it might harbor corruption. So Salma tells him that uniting the armies will give them better chances of winning against their neighboring enemies like Macedonia, and tries to convince Castor that he will not allow corruption to breed under his rule. Salma tells him to come for his head in the event that he fails and becomes a corrupt king. At the end of their argument, Lady Excel pledges her allegiance and that of her entire army to Salma, but Castor and Carmine stand by their decision, saying that the previous king didn't consult them before handing the throne over to Salma. Castor says that he is not joining forces with Carmine and would rather remain neutral. When Carmine finally speaks, he tells Salma that he remains solid on his decision because he has to uphold his pride as a warrior. After some heated exchange of words with the Duke, Salma makes a request. He asks both Carmine and Castor to agree that if any of them is defeated, their men will become loyal to the conqueror. Finally, Lycia cuts her hair while the Dukes are still watching. This displays her determination in fighting by Salma's side. Juna shows up beside the Duchess, and Salma thanks her for being the reason why Excel was on his side. Lycia also assures him that he has the complete support of the others as well. On the day of battle, Gaius shouts a battle cry for his army to begin their surprise invasion of Elfredin. He arrives with his army at Altamura and Allen, where he commands one of the spineless lords of the city to open the city gates. The man pleads for some more time because the army is split into a group that loves Gaius and another that won't hesitate to crush his skull. For this reason, Julius advises his father to deceive the guard, so he promises not to hurt any member of the Forbidden Army if the soldier lets his army pass through. But Gaius is being such a tricky bastard, and he plans to kill the man once he opens those gates. Meanwhile, Salma has already built a fortress at the entrance to his kingdom with the aid of Keed's earth magic and the efforts of the other construction workers. Now the opposing army is doing its best to tear down the walls, so they switch from the usage of bows and arrows to the employment of massive cannon shooters. Once they fire these, their cannons create dents in the walls of the fortress, and Hal asks Keed to use some of her magic to block the attacks, but she says she can't because she used it all up in building the walls. Just in time, a dark elf named Wadden shows up from nowhere and fires an arrow at one of the cannonballs, splitting it instantly. He expresses his gratitude to Hal for rescuing his daughter from the landslide ruins and says that his daughter says she will grow to be like Hal, although that pretty much pisses him off from within. Ludwig commands the royal army to charge only towards the cannons, paying no mind to the enemy soldiers. This turns out to be a success, and when Carmine gets word about it, he is surprisingly calm. He tells the fretting generals of his army that their move with the cannons has proved useless and that he has a better strategy. Knowing that he had 40,000 men to battle against Salma's 10,000, Carmine says that he would have to lure Salma towards his army, because it is obvious that Salma was not present in the city at the time of the attacks, as shown by the marked defensiveness of his army. With an evil expression on his face, Carmine asks if everything is set to implement his devious master plan. On the other hand, Gaius believes he's about to conquer the city of Altamura, and his son announces for the soldiers to get ready, but they are shocked to hear war cries, and Lord Weiss returns looking more terrified. He says that he has failed to convince the more aggressive half of the army to calm down, so he offers Gaius some gold dust in exchange for his patience. He pleads with Gaius to wait until the next day to launch his attack when the shadow of the trees is cast upon the bags of gold dust. By that time, Weiss plans to convince the other half of the army to support Gaius. Eventually, Julius convinces his father to agree to Weiss's plea. It turns out that Weiss is not a traitor of Elfredin, but has been secretly working with Excel. He's concerned about the notable amount of gold they might lose to Gaius, but the Duchess tells him that there is some wisdom in buying time with the gold as Salma had planned. However, if Salma doesn't show up by noon, they are as good as dead. While these lovebirds are at dinner, Keed rests her head on Hal's shoulder and tells him that if they can get through the ongoing war, they can get through anything else. Despite her shyness, she tells him to guard her like an egg, ensuring her safety throughout the war. The next morning, Carmine's army is still trying so hard to destroy the fortress, but Keed observes that the enemies have adopted a new formation, and this is good news because it means that they are trying to have more direct combat, much to the advantage of the Forbidden Army. On the other hand, Gaius and his son return to the spot where they made a deal with Weiss, and seeing that the conditions he agreed to have been met, Gaius orders them to attack. At the battlefield, there's a sudden influx of wyverns headed rapidly towards the fortress in a manner that makes Hal think that they are reinforcements coming to help Carmine's army. Well, a lot has been going on behind the scenes, and the night before, here's what happened in the Red City. Castor's right-hand man came to tell him that the city had been evacuated, and the air forces of other lands were looking to join forces with him, but he was completely uninterested because he was unwilling to share the glory of his rebellion with any other. However, he began to see Salma in a more positive light, although it was too late for him to change his actions. He was concerned about the fact that Salma could spring up a surprise move on him, given the hidden nature of his whereabouts at the moment. While they are still talking, Carla bursts into the room to tell her father that Salma's forces had been spotted, but it is surprising to know that there is only one ship in sight. Just then, Salma requests a video call with Castor, while the ship is being dragged towards the Duke's castle. Immediately, it begins to launch cannonballs towards the castle, and Castor is impressed to see that Salma was able to pull such an innovative move. Salma gives Castor an opportunity to join the winning team, but he says he isn't going to destroy his reputation in such a disgraceful manner as surrendering. Salma bids him farewell, and Castor tells his daughter to silence the damn cannons. With great speed, Carla directs the Air Force towards Salma's ship with the intention of capturing him alive. They get into an impressive formation and fire at the ship, but it counters their attacks much to their surprise. One of the strikers finds that the wheels of the ship are not that strong, so Carla commands them to strike it, although she has it in mind not to strike any part of the ship that could hurt Princess Lycia, just in case she's aboard the ship. They are finally able to stop the cannons from firing, but when they get there, they receive the greatest shock of their lives. There are no enemy soldiers in sight, only puppet strings. It was at this moment that Carla understood the game that was being played. The ship had been a distraction away from Salma, who was headed towards his main target, Castor. Seeing that Salma has made his way into the castle, Castor is surprised and curious to know just how Salma managed to sneak in. Salma tells him that he found secret passageways by going through the blueprints of the Red City. After the introductions, Castor tells Salma that he can trust his loyal servant Talman to lead the Air Force in the event that he loses to Salma. Appreciating his extent of care for his staff, Salma gives Castor a final opportunity to surrender, but he draws his sword and tells him that real men do not easily back down. Aisha immediately steps forward with her sword and tells Salma to step aside, but Castor mocks him by asking him to face him directly if he truly is a hero. Swiftly, Aisha swings at his blade with her much larger sword. He evades the attack and calls her a little kid, but she tells him that she has been alive for decades. With a powerful swing, Aisha throws him into the wall, and Castor is impressed at her brutal strength. Aisha tells him that she doesn't mind being a dumb girl, as long as she possesses the strength needed to protect Salma, so he wonders just how good a guy Salma is to deserve this level of loyalty. Suddenly, Lycia appears from nowhere, launching a surprise attack at the Duke and using her magic to surround him in an ice trap. Aisha quickly breaks through the ice with her sword, striking Castor and sending him to the ground. The princess feels sorry for Castor, but he tells her that he fought diligently, and even though he has been defeated, he still retains his pride. He asks Lycia if Salma is a good king, and she tells him that he is good to her to the extent that she can fight her own father for Salma's sake. As they hear the sound of their battleship exploding, Lycia immediately places a slave collar on Castor's neck, telling him that if the collar senses him attempting any harm to its master, who happens to be Salma, it will tighten on his neck and his head will roll. Soon after, Carla walks in and is horrified to see her father lying on the floor in a slave collar. She immediately draws her sword. Lycia quickly warns her about the collar and tells her that if she does anything stupid to Salma, her father will pay for it with his life. Salma keeps to his end of the bargain and temporarily appoints Talman as the general of the Air Force, but under the command of the Forbidden Army. Talman is ready to serve, although he's curious about what will happen to the Duke and his daughter. Salma tells him that he's going to review their case after the war, but until then, Talman would have to assemble the force to announce that they are now under a new command before heading to Carmine's duchy. On their way back, Lycia begins to say good things about Carla, calling her a good and devoted person, and hinting at the fact that she might have an appealing body underneath the heavy armor she's wearing. Salma gets the picture, understanding that Lycia is leading him to spare Carla's life and take her as a concubine, but Salma is concerned about losing the trust of the people by overlooking the crime of rebellion committed by Carla. To back him up, Carla tells Lycia not to plead for her life because Salma actually sent them numerous letters to change their minds, but they rejected them. Back at the fortress, as Keed and Hal watch the Air Force coming towards them, Keed immediately knows that Salma won the battle against Castor. Talman orders the force to attack Carmine's castle, but avoid touching residential areas. Salma and Hal congratulate each other for being successful in carrying out their plan, although they both face difficulties in dealing with their enemies. Observing their conversation, Carla is surprised to see that Hal speaks to the king in a very informal manner, and Lycia tells her that Salma is really cool with it. Meanwhile, Carmine's generals bring reports about the damages created by the attacks of the Air Force and are asking what steps to take against the force which betrayed them. After hearing that Salma now possesses full control of the skies, Carmine sees that his people are basically hostages at this point and realizes that he has lost. Salma's generals, however, cannot share the same sentiment because the army is unscathed, and they can still use the innocent civilians as human shields while they hide in the castle. These selfish suggestions surprise Carmen, and he is able to finally unravel the true nature of the generals he had been protecting. He surprises them by having slave collars placed on their necks, so they'll have to beg Salma to spare their lives. Carmen also asks his right-hand man to place a slave collar on his own neck and announce his total surrender to Salma. A message gets to Salma that a peace flag was raised in Randall, and Salma's loyal followers were amazed to find that the war was over that quickly. Old man Carmen is seen holding an expensive bottle of wine, which was given to him by King Albert. He planned to drink himself into a stupor whenever Licia would be getting married, and said that he treasured the gift above anything else, but now he knows he might be captured and never live to see that day. Interrupting his soliloquy, Beowulf bursts in with good news, saying that Salma was not invading the city and only took Carmine's army along with him to a distant destination. This pleases Carmine so much that he raises his bottle in honor of Salma and Licia. Carla is confused by the turn of events, so she demands an explanation from Salma and Licia. They tell her that the entire thing was planned by Duke Carmine. Salma tells her that he never intended to fight the Duke, but the only one who was initially on his side was the Duchess, by proxy of her granddaughter's relationship with Salma. Despite his lack of support for Salma, Duke Carmine surprisingly had his own secret plans to expose and deal with the corrupt officials in his army, so this worked for the overall benefit of the entire kingdom. He apologizes to Carla because, unfortunately, her father was not let in on the secret plan for fear that if it leaked out, Duke Carmine's sacrifice would be in vain. Carla says she understands after hearing that Carmine had placed his life on the line for all this to happen. We're back at Altamura with Gaius and his foolish son. They're planning to teach Weiss a lesson, but they see someone climb onto the wall and Gaius is surprised to see that it is the Duchess, Excel. After a while, he figured that she probably had been there the whole time and was in close contact with Salma. His son quickly understands that they've been set up and tells his father that they have to retreat immediately. Suddenly, Excel creates a portal which broadcasts Salma as he announces that he has won the civil war and is now in full control of all the armed forces. He also exposes Gaius for exploiting the conflict to his advantage by trying to seize control of Altamura as the battles ensued. So he declares war on Gaius and tells him that the Forbidden Army is headed towards the Amydonian capital, Van, to burn the city to the ground. Word gets out to the Princess of Amadonia that her father's army was ambushed on their way back to defend the city, and half of their men were taken out by the Forbidden Army. Julius and Gaius, however, managed to recover an additional number of soldiers from the surrounding villages, but by the time they arrive at the capital city, Elfridin has already conquered it, hoisting their flags and banners everywhere. Seeing this, Gaius is utterly dismayed as he thinks that the whole of Van has been conquered, but his son spots the castle and notices that there are no Elfridin flags there, so he commands them to get rid of the Forbidden Army. Salma loves the sound of this because it means there will be a head-on attack, so he commands the army to engage them, and Ludwin orders his men to get into a special formation. The battle begins, and the opposing armies fight with so much brute force, but Keed changes the game when she uses her magical powers to entrap some of the Amydonian soldiers in the ground. Salma seems to be worried about something, and Carla wishes to know what bothers him so much, so he tells her that he feels that if things get really bloody, he might have to throw his pride away and plead for the lives of his men to be spared. However, he has noticed that lately, he has been acting more like a king, even though he feels like a coward for disliking the idea of bloodshed. In this light, he decides that he has to stop acting like a temporary king and assume the position of the fully instated king. On the battlefield, Gaius realizes that he has made a terrible mistake by sending his already tired soldiers into war, so he tells Julius to make a run for it because they have been defeated. Even though Julius is hesitant to leave his father's side, he eventually escapes the battlefield with a group of soldiers. Salma is alerted that Gaius is charging directly towards him with a smaller army of elite fighters, although the main army has retreated. He then tells Carla he would be resetting the slave collar's master to be Licia, and his final will, in the event that anything should happen to him, is that Licia will be the next ruler of the kingdom. Carla refuses to yield to such a dumb request because she can strike Gaius down if Salma orders her to, so Salma gives the order and she takes off. Ludwin sees the army approaching and aims his spear towards Gaius, and when he looks closely at the body, he realizes that he had been tricked and that it was just a body double. Carla, on the other hand, quickly spots Gaius and launches the opening attack. He easily defends against it, causing them to be in a deadlock as both are equally strong, but suddenly Salma's puppet appears from nowhere and lands a blow on Gaius, which is quite hilarious to him because he doesn't understand how a puppet is supposed to defeat him. That instant, Salma tells Carla to step aside, and when Gaius draws nearer to him, Salma controls his puppet to block the attack with a strike while at the same time instructing Carla to set the puppet on fire. There's a loud explosion after Gaius is set on fire, and Salma runs to check if Carla is okay, but she's upset that he's on the battlefield exposing himself to getting killed, which would cause so much grief to Licia. Shockingly, Gaius comes out of the fire and still charges towards Salma, even though he's not really in the best shape. As he approaches, multiple arrows are fired at him, but it doesn't stop him from throwing his sword at Salma. Luckily, the sword lands just a few inches away from Salma and doesn't harm him, and Gaius finally gives up and falls dead to the ground. Salma is impressed by the valor displayed by Gaius and his warriors, so he says that their story should be included in their history books. Princess Roroa is given the sad news of her father's demise, so she gets some time alone and sheds a few tears to mourn her foolish old man. The next day, Lycia finds out that Salma had actually been planning to take over Madonia for quite some time, but is surprised that he managed to keep the casualties at the border to a minimum. He says that he was advised by Hakuya not to evacuate the villagers living at the border for fear that the Amadonian troops would easily figure out his next move. He then tells her that he planned a fake attack of fiery monsters to scare the villagers away so they would have to leave the area without actually making a formal evacuation. Ludwin informed Salma that Roroa had left the city with the finance minister and some officials, and Julius left with some soldiers towards the west, so Salma requests some bureaucrats to lure the officials back to the land because they were relevant in the development of Amadonia. Next, Pancho reports that the Amadonian treasury didn't possess enough stored food, but rather possessed an abundance of weapons. To this, Salma says that the weapons will be sold, while food will be rationed throughout the country until things stabilize. If there still isn't enough food to go around, he will have to ship some from their own kingdom as a matter of urgency. Another official reports that the Amadonian soldiers are in good spirits, and this would ease the conquest of other cities of the kingdom. But Salma says he wouldn't be capturing any other city because he wasn't ready to handle too much trouble from the empire. In fact, he already knows that they are coming for him because he breached the Mankind Declaration, the treaty made to unite humans against the Demon Kingdom, by using military power to capture the capital city of Van. Because Amadonia is a signatory to that treaty, the empire may go to extreme lengths to recover it from him. Lycia wonders why he still didn't sign the treaty after knowing what would happen, but he tells her that the declaration came with a secret catch that could break up the empire in the future. Since the war, there has been so much hatred and negativity towards the Elfriden kingdom, so Ludwin wonders if Salma has planned anything to ease the tensions. Coincidentally, Salma summons Juna, and she looks really hot in her navy uniform. He then tells her that he invited her to carry out the next phase of his plan, a project called Lorelei. Later, a newscaster is seen on the broadcast, and she says she will be bringing news about daily events going on in the kingdom of Elfriden and its environs. It seems like Salma has organized some form of entertainment show next, because Aisha is clothed in a pretty dress which makes her a little uncomfortable. When Salma appears with her on the screen, the people of Amadonia are amazed to see that it was such a young man that had defeated Gaius. Salma goes on to announce that they're hosting Elfriden's first musical show. Then he introduces a young girl on stage. She performs her cute little song, and Juna is the next person to present. While Juna is performing, Salma pulls Aisha aside to tell her that he has invited a surprise guest to sing next on stage, but he wants Aisha to watch his back. Without hesitation, Aisha beats her chest to say that she will watch over him with her own life. Salma awkwardly turns his face away after seeing her chest bounce like that. Juna's performance really pleases the crowd, and Salma invites his surprise guest to perform. He introduces her as Lieutenant General Margarita of Amadonia, who will be performing the Amadonian national anthem. The crowd is shocked and a brief moment of silence ensues, but as soon as she starts singing the anthem, they all stand in respect. As soon as she finishes, she tells Salma that he can now chop her head off. However, Salma surprises her by saying that he has no reason to. She can't believe it because the Amadonian anthem is basically a song about seizing their stolen land back from Elfriden. Still, Salma tells her that Elfriden has no such silly laws against the anthems of other countries, and that a good country was one in which everyone could freely sing whatever they liked. Meanwhile, Salma's prediction about the Empire is about to come true. At the forefront of the Mankind Declaration is the Grand Chaos Empire, led by a very beautiful and sweet-natured lady called Maria Euphoria, who is also known as the Saint of the Empire. Now Maria's sister Jean tells her that she's heading to the captured city of Van to negotiate with Salma for the release of the city so that they can maintain the prestige of the Empire after his recent conquests. We're back to a lot of paperwork, and our hero realizes that he has excessive burdens to bear following the recent acquisition of Van. The good news, though, is that the people of Van have a newfound interest in bouncing back after numerous years of oppression. Roroa sees that ever since power was seized from her father, the people have had a sense of freedom like never before. She's pretty sure that they won't allow her brother a chance at the throne, and all of this is thanks to Salma, because after his motivational speech on the broadcast, he set out to lower taxes and increase the circulation of goods. She, however, plans to make Salma pay for what he had done to the capital and to her family. Salma is informed that there's an army headed in their direction, so he asks to be updated if anything comes up. At that moment, he is joined by Pancho, who brings him a beguiling lily plant which has some hallucinatory effects, but most importantly, possesses lily roots which were food items of tremendous value. However, in order to harvest the roots, people made use of Olderans, who were known addicts to the hallucinatory effects of the lily plant. Salma asks if there are any Olderans in Amadonia, and Pancho tells him that there are, and he has already contacted Tamo to negotiate a deal with them, where they will be given barrels of food in exchange for their manpower in harvesting the lily roots. After organizing everything, Pancho prepares some stew with the lily roots and serves it to the people, giving them some to take home as well. Later, Salma, Juna, and Tamo are in the market, and Salma wears a hat to conceal his identity. When Tamo runs off to go shopping, Juna pulls him closer and holds onto his arm, assuring him that he is well protected and safe with her. She suggests that they go shopping for his adopted younger sister Tamo, and when they get to the shop, he tells the little girl to pick whatever fancies her. Juna follows her and picks some pretty dresses for her, but Salma picks an ugly pair of shoes. The Prime Minister uses a military analogy to tell him that men and women bargain differently, so Salma gets the hint and leaves it all in Juna's hands. Salma asks why he had to use a military analogy, and he says that lately he has had to deal with a charming but cunning little devil, which we all know to be the Princess of Amadonia. After shopping, Tamo is seen wearing a really pretty dress and has a bag filled with more clothes than she can carry. She's delighted and grateful to her older brother for the present he gave her, even though the shoes are quite ugly. Salma also presents a ladybug hairpin to Juna, and she becomes flustered as she thanks him. Juna tells him to get presents for Licia and the others, and he tells her that he got a present for everyone. He also tells her to skip the formalities and to call him by his name, so she leans into him and calls him a naughty flirt. They stop by one of the stalls to grab a quick bite, and Tamo falls asleep on Salma's thighs. A few minutes later, a newscaster forecasts that the weather would be sunny in both Elfriden and Van, making it perfect weather for them to do their laundry. Suddenly, a female voice from behind them says it is amazing to see the dual voice broadcast being used so innovatively, and when they turn, they find that it is Jean Euphoria, leader of the Empire's military. Seeing that her guards have overpowered him, Salma tells her that she must be brimming with so much audacity to have casually walked into his territory. Juna stepped forward to protect Salma, but Jean said she meant no harm, and she only came to confirm if all the rumors she heard about Salma were true. She tells him she heard that Salma was a wise ruler who had turned the economic situation of a bankrupt kingdom around, and who devised a long-lasting solution to the food shortage problem by using creative means to prepare appetizing meals that people generally did not like. After that, she says that she also heard that he was a pathological womanizer who, despite being engaged to the former king's daughter, was still gathering the kingdom's most beautiful women and creating a royal harem with them. Juna isn't surprised and even giggles because she had also heard the same rumor, but our dearest hero is speechless to know the sort of reputation he has. Jean tells him that if the rumors are false, then her plan wouldn't work, because she planned to use her beautiful sister to plead with him to release the kingdom of Amadonia after hearing about his weakness for beautiful women. Salma is surprised that Jean was willing to use someone as reputable as her sister, who is even known as the Empire's saint, to pull off such an act. However, Jean tells him that her sister doesn't like being called a saint because she's anything but a saint. Maria, however, doesn't mind the title if it has a desirable effect on young men like Salma. Hearing this, Juna comes up with her own silly title, songstress, and asks Salma what he thinks of the name. After a while, Jean tells Salma that he is an amusing king who gets along really well with his officials, which was enough evidence that his kingdom was really stable. Jean tells them that for the same reason, her sister Maria is being called a saint, although everyone has kept a healthy distance from her. Also, Maria is so deeply invested in her duties that she treats everyone equally, and this is the reason for her involvement in asking for the release of Amadonia, because otherwise she has nothing to gain from helping them. Jean thinks the news broadcasting thing is cool, so she asks for Salma's permission to do something similar in her country. She wonders how he was able to come up with such an innovative way to use the dual voice broadcast, so he tells her that it's actually a pretty common thing in the world which he comes from. Immediately, Jean bows to Salma, apologizing on behalf of the Empire for summoning him from his world. Salma tells her that he knew that the Empire had no need for a hero, and he was only summoned to serve as a human sacrifice on behalf of Elfriden. The kingdom of Elfriden was not a signatory to the Mankind Declaration, but they were somehow beneficiaries of it. However, due to the dwindling state of their economy, they couldn't afford to contribute as much as the neighboring kingdoms, so they had to summon a hero as a sacrifice to the demons, just to make it seem like they were actually doing something serious. Jean says that no one expected the hero's summoning to work or for things to get better for the Elfriden kingdom, but Salma had proved them wrong. Now all Salma wishes to do is to protect his newfound family, and he hopes that Jean will accept his jurisdiction over the land of Amadonia, but she says that she also has a family to protect. So Salma tells her that they would have to negotiate in order to arrive at a compromise. Jean says she hopes he will take it easy on her, and immediately turns to leave. Somehow it feels like the so-called negotiations wouldn't be as easy as expected. When they return to the castle, Tamo excitedly shows Licia her new dress, and Salma gives Aisha the lipstick he got for her. Aisha is excited about her present, and hopes to become more feminine for her darling king. As Licia watches all this, she burns with envy until Salma gives her a beautiful necklace which looks really good on her. As Salma watches this family sharing joy and laughter, he strengthens his resolve to protect them at all costs.